Welcome everyone back to Ruslan's Bortnik YouTube channel in English. My name is James Talberg and I'm here today again with Ruslan Bortnik, political scientist, political expert, and the director of Ukrainian Institute of Politics. Ruslan, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, James, for this common work. Thank you.
Of course. I want to talk today to you about the negotiations. Now, when we have the new elected president of the United States, we might have potentially in a very near future, negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine and the West, like different variations. But before I get into asking you about how do you think these negotiations are going to look like in the future, I want to break down with you the history of the negotiations that were starting since the beginning of the full-scale war. And if we go all the way to the back, in 2022, February 24th, if I remember correctly, Putin has launched a full-scale war against Ukraine, and the negotiations started almost immediately. If I remember correctly, in the first week or in the first 2 weeks, the negotiations have been started. So before we get into the parts of the negotiations, I think it's important to mention that when Putin has announced the so-called special military operation, he said that the goals of the special military operations are denazification and demilitarization. So with demilitarization, that makes sense. He wanted Ukraine's army to be smaller, weaker, or just limited by all means. That kind of makes sense. But can you elaborate what denazification means or what he was trying to say when he was announcing?
Yes, I can. I hope, because this term was described at least 2 times in the draft peace treatment between the sides. The first version was previously signed during the Minsk time of negotiation in February-March 2022, after the beginning of the full-scale war between Ukraine and Russia. And the second, its so-called Istanbul Agreement, was also drafted in April, maybe in May, because the negotiation was continuing after the official ending of it. And so there is such a term, which means that Ukraine should to prohibit some right-wing parties. Ukraine should to make the procedure of de-glorification, to stop glorification of some right-wing movements, nationalistic movements, which were working in Ukraine during the Second World War. I'm talking about the Bandera and few common movements at the time, and also there was included the right for left-wing people in Ukraine to restore their ability on standing buildings, monuments for the soldiers of the Soviet army, to restore the ability of doing the communistic and so-called left parties, post-Soviet parties in Ukrainian territory. So it was a very complex doings which leads Ukraine to restoration our political system, which leads Ukraine to cutting the right-wing anti-Russian, very nationalistic ideology, and which led Ukraine to the previous time before the revolution 2014, when this glorification and when this developing of this right-wing movement in Ukraine started.
Mm-hmm. Now I kind of understand that. If we get into the specifics of negotiations, I want to talk about the first variation of these negotiations. I think the first negotiations between Ukraine and Russia were direct. That was happening in Belarus. So we had a delegation from Ukraine that went for the negotiations, and we had the delegation from Russia going to meet with the Ukrainian delegation. So the initial paper that they were using was actually drafted by the Russians. So Russia proposed terms on the terms that they agreed for a ceasefire, right? I just want to read out some of these terms, and I want to hear your opinion. What do you think about these terms, how practical they were, and how realistic it was to work with them? It's going to take some time because I'm going to translate it actually, so it will just be a little bit slower. Russia has proposed to limit the Ukrainian army to 50,000 personnel. They wanted to have Ukraine only 1,500 officer team, like officers that are controlling the soldiers, that are organizing strategies, just basically managers. This is 5 times less than what Ukrainian army was in 2022. So that's just a major limit. In terms of the equipment, they were proposing to have Ukraine only 55 jets, 300 tanks, which was way less at that time than the army that Belarus had, which is a country that almost 10 times smaller than Ukraine. So this is just a significantly smaller army. In return, that's not everything. They also asked Ukraine to avoid producing any type of equipment, specifically missiles that can go as far as 250 kilometers. So they didn't want to have Ukraine any long-range weapons. They also asked Ukraine to announce that Donbas is going to be a separate, how would you say it, like a separate, not a country, but just a separate region that can pursue their own political...
Autonomous, deeply autonomous region.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
A deeply autonomous region. I think it was still part of Ukraine, but then just like they have their own rights and they have their own potentially military or police or what else can be included. So this is what Russia have proposed to Ukraine in the first 2 weeks of war. What do you think about these propositions? Obviously, they were drafted by the Russians, and that was just like completely opposing the Ukrainian side. How practical they were, how realistic they were, and why they have started with such strong statements if in the first 2 weeks they weren't able to capture Ukraine. And obviously the capturing of Ukraine in the 3 days as they were announcing didn't happen. So that just sounds like a crazy ultimatum that probably was not so realistic to start negotiations with.
There were an additional articles about the neutral status of Ukraine. Ukraine wasn't allowed to enter to NATO or another military blocs. Also, there was an amendment about the state status for the Russian language, like a second official, second state language in Ukraine, additionally to Ukrainian language. The most interesting in this situation that Ukrainian side was ready to discuss this point.
Yeah, they basically agreed to start negotiations based on...
It happened because Russian troops were around the Kiev. And in the first stage of the war, during the February, March, in the beginning of April, the Kiev was under the siege and under the big pressure from Russian forces, which were able to use even the field artillery to shell the Kiev. And I think it was a negotiation under the gun, and when you have the gun on your head. And so Ukraine started this negotiation, and we even agreed some points of these negotiations if we'll trust the Western mass media, which worked a lot about this. But after the change in situation in the battlefield, I think and after the power in the Ukrainian negotiation position, after the change in the situation in the battlefield, Ukraine also declined many of the points And
yes, they have started asking to adjust some of the terms.
the first Ukrainian negotiation victory was to move the table of negotiation from Minsk, Belarus, which is a partner of Russia, to Istanbul, to the Turkey. Turkey is much more independent country in this situation than Belarus. And then Ukraine declined the Russian claims on the sides of Ukrainian army, the Russian claims on the Russian language of the denazifications, but Ukraine was ready to discuss about the territorial control and about the neutral status for Ukraine. Then we had Istanbul stage of this negotiation, which was also unsuccessful formally. You can find, friends, the texts, the full articles of these agreements, draft agreements, in describing this video. But the second stage was also unsuccessful because even Ukraine was ready to sign the document. Because Western partners of Ukraine was not ready to give the security guarantees for Ukraine as a country and security guarantees for Ukrainian leadership, personal security guarantees, political security guarantees. And the absence of these security guarantees in the situation of possible political...
We're talking about potential next future crisis, war, conflict between Russia and Ukraine. They haven't had any actual securities that the West was ready to sign.
Yes, if we are talking about the security guarantees, we are talking about the security guarantees from United States, Great Britain, Russia, China, many countries.
France, Germany.
Yes, because Ukrainian government was willing to have to obtain some kind of guarantees which will not to appear as a war in the future, the new war in the future. And also there was a very big unofficial part of these guarantees. It's personal political guarantees for Ukraine, for Ukrainian government, for Ukrainian leadership, for Ukrainian president. Because if Ukraine could sign the document, it means that Ukraine officially or half officially loses the very big part of Ukrainian territories. Ukraine lost a lot of people in that war, and the question of political responsibility on the next election could arise very sharp for Ukrainian government, for personally Zelensky. And of course, we remember that very famous phrase of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who said, just keep going.
He just came in and said, keep fighting.
Just keep fighting, just keep going, just keep continuing this war, because West was not ready to sign any common document with Russia, especially if we are talking the security guarantee. Any common document between the West and Russia in that moment. It means
but why?
Because it means that the old world, the rule-based world, is damaged.
But the alternative is potentially the conflict is going to keep growing and could have got into NATO in Europe.
Let's be honest in this situation, James. I think the West nowadays the West has the most successful company in Europe. If we are taking account the last 100 years. And that is a problem of Ukraine. That is a problem of the world trade. That is a problem of people who are not earning from this war. But to be honest, look, Russia is exhausted in this moment. West is very united. The military expenditures grew up in few times.
Well, depends for whom though, because if we look at Germany economy is suffering because they were dependent on the cheap resources from Russia. They have migration crisis, they have a potential World War III crisis. Yeah, the percentage might be small, but they still have it on the table.
But Germany is not the main player around this table. Germany, the security guarantees of Germany is still in the pocket of United States because of military bases and so on. Germany is not sovereign in terms of military security just now, for nowadays. So the voice of Germany or voice of Eastern and Southern Europe was not very important. But the Great Britain, United States, maybe France even, they feel not bad and even very good in this situation. But every process and every political or military process in the world had the time before between the birth and death. And for now, it looks like the high level of this successes of these incomes from this war, politically, military, is ending. The main military expenditures are made. The main resources are used for in this war. The Russia is a lot exhausted, not fully, of course, but a lot exhausted. Ukraine reached our limits. So if we are talking about the continuation of the war, we are strictly talking about the growing up the Western expenditures for this war, because Ukraine reached our limits in demography and resources. So the situation and estimation is the situation in Western media, in Western political systems, and in very quiet rooms is changing.
So in simple words, you're saying that West have caught its benefits. They have got whatever they wanted to get in terms of their geopolitical strategies, geopolitical goals out of that war. They're happy with the outcome, and now they just want to potentially pause, stop, freeze, and move on.
Now they're trying to manage this situation in a better way, or find their solution to make this war cheaper, much cheaper, or to find the solution to end this war, to collect together all the possible resources for the future competition with China, for example.
Right. So that's on the Western side. I fully understand that. But then what about Moscow? At this point, yeah, you're saying that Russia is exhausted, but how they view the continuation of the war? What is their goals at this point? Like, are they still standing about demilitarization? Are they still standing behind denazification? Because obviously, if they're freezing the war now, they're getting either of it. Like, denazification didn't happen. Demilitarization definitely haven't happened. How is Russia viewing the continuation of the war? Or maybe what's even Putin's personal agenda with the continuation of the war? How is he seeing that?
This is the main problem, because Russia lost a lot. Even if we are talking about the people, if we are talking about the political phase of international audience, if we are talking about the money, Russia lost a lot. So she wants to achieve a lot. She wants to achieve a compensation package from the possible compromise with
it sounds a little bit funny when you attack somebody and you start a war and then you want the compensation package.
Yes, of course, you're right, absolutely. But if we are talking about Moscow position, we are talking from the Moscow position as we understand it from this. And maybe for now, West is ready for some time unofficial hidden compromises with Russia. It looks like now, because new United States president, the Chancellor of Germany, even the General Secretary of NATO are talking about that Russia can save the captured lands, we can freeze this conflict, and so on. It's a proposition for compromise possible. But Russia is not able to accept informal compromise. Russia is willing to sign the document, the official document, like a Moscow treatment between Soviet Union and Finland in 1940. Russia wants to guarantee the control over the captured assets, lands, people, and so on. And West and Ukraine are not ready to sign such documents. Another way, Russia says that we had this situation previous time. Let's remind the Gorbachev, Yeltsin. Many people inside of NATO promised us to doesn't develop NATO to the east, but it happened. We don't believe your words anymore. We need to sign the official documents. even Angela Merkel, even when we was in the Minsk agreement negotiation, I'm talking about 2014, 2022, the first and the second.
Yeah, I know what you're about to say. The very famous statement that Angela Merkel said,
Yeah.
we were just using those agreements to postpone a future potential war between Russia and Ukraine. I understand.
And give Ukraine more time.
And give Ukraine more time.
To prepare for this war. So there's a very extremely low level of trust between Russia and West. And this is the main problem about what the form and what the type of the documents could be signed. Russia is not ready for an official agreement, so Russia is trying to push for Ukraine as much as she can, and Russia is continuing her offensive operation as much as she can on the territory of Ukraine. But I want to add in this situation, of course, the level of distrust is very high, but it's not the first time in human history. After the Second World War between the Soviet Union and the United States, the level of distrust was also extremely high. But the sides found some compromises, found the way to sign a lot of international documents, a lot of documents of restrictions of armoring and so on. It was very important. Moreover, if we are talking about the Ukraine and Russia, Russia let Ukrainian go out from the Soviet Union in 1991. Then Russia in 1997 signed with Ukraine a big treatment about the cooperation and friendship, and divided the Chernomorsk fleet and so on. And moreover, if you are talking about nowadays or just now, we have a working contract between Ukraine and Russia, for example, for gas transfer through Ukraine.
Certain agreements can be reached and sustained, just like with the gas.
If there is a strong will and strong support of this agreement, any agreement can be possible.
So if now we're breaking that situation and we're looking into future, you've mentioned all the distrust situation, all the challenges that can happen in the future negotiation, and Russian situation that they want an official agreement. The West is only ready for an unofficial agreement. With all these challenges, how do you view the future negotiation between Ukraine, West, and Russia? And I'm referring to, Trump was elected. He said he's going to finish the conflict in 24 hours. I haven't seen that yet happening. But how is the future negotiation could look like when we have so many challenges on both sides?
I think these negotiations will start from bilateral position. It means the United States will talk with Russia, and then the United States will talk with Ukraine. And then maybe I'm almost sure that Trump will try to gather all together, to sit down Zelensky, Vladimir Putin around one table physically.
Is it possible in your opinion?
I think it's possible because decline of such a heavy proposition from United States could lead to the extremely worsening the situation between the United States and Russia and United States and Ukraine. And no one, I think, Putin and Zelensky, both of them are very clever person. No one of them are interested in this worsening of the situation. In the straight conflict with the Trump villain, no one interested. But I think this meeting could be made in the future. But the results, possible consequences of this meeting, I can't imagine. I think it's much easier to come together even than to find any solutions, to find any common positions during or after this meeting. At the same time, for Trump, it will be quite enough only to do this meeting without any significant consequences from that meeting, because his main goal, his main promise to his audience, to his voters during the elections was to start this process, to show his United States ability to find the peace through the power, through the push to the both sides.
Let's say I understand it on that level, that he can meet between the presidents and he can start a negotiation process, and let's say they even agreed on something. But then when it's easier to start a war, I think it's way harder to end one. I'm referring to the population. The Ukrainian population is not ready, in the majority of the Ukrainian population, they're not ready to officially give up on their land. And I'm sure, as you've mentioned by yourself, Russian paid a high price during that war. I doubt they'll be ready to, I'm referring to the population, to the Russian people, to go on some heavy compromise agreement with Ukraine. What do you think from that perspective? Even if the leaders will agree on something, it might cause an internal conflict that will the outcome will be the continuation of the war.
It's also a very hard question, and it's quite clear that any compromise for Russia is much easier than for Ukraine. Because
why is that?
Why is that? Because any compromise model for Russia, for Ukraine, it means that Ukraine is losing something.
Well, it is.
Yes, and for Russia, it means that Russia is achieving something. Lands, people, new geopolitical position, lifting the sanctions, everything. Moreover, this war is going on the territory of Ukraine, and suffering of Ukrainian people is much bigger. We can't compare it with suffering of Russian people on this war. Russian people
that's true.
Continue their ordinary life. Ukrainians not. We lost a lot of people. We are suffering from air alarms. We lost a lot of the territories. So the level of suffer is much higher. So for Ukrainians, it's much harder to find this package,
to accept the compromise
package in this situation. To avoid the possible future destabilization, political destabilization in Ukrainian society after the possible peaceful agreement. So it's much harder for Ukraine. But there are historical examples of this situation. For example, Finland, 1940. When the agreement between the Soviet Union and Finland, when the Finland was very brave in fighting the Soviet Union, they were very successful. At some time, after the 6 months, they exhausted all their limits, resources, and so on, and they agreed that peace. They lost a part of territory, they lost some people, but they saved the country, which is very successful now, a very beautiful now country. I like a lot of citates of Mannerheim, who was a leader of Finland at the moment, and of course it was a very difficult decision, but historically it was only right decision, like history showed.
At the end of the day, that makes sense. Absolutely. We can definitely say that Finland is a very successful and prospering country, and nobody even remembers that they've had some losses in the history because they are happy where they are right now. Ruslan, thank you so much for your comments today. We're definitely going to break down potential future negotiations that should happen and will happen between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, James, for such a great questions, and thank you our audience for the attention to our project. Thank you.